What would you do if you started to receive a strange letter every year on the same day, and each letter carried something unusual inside? Would you ignore it, or would you try to find the secret behind it? This is the story of how one simple mystery changed everything for me and for the young woman who came to my door one cold winter evening. My name is Clara James. At the time of this story, I was working as a journalist in a small industrial town in the north of England. Life was often gray and hard in those days. The sky was filled with smoke from the factories, and the streets were always busy, with workers rushing home after long hours. I lived in a boarding house near the train station, and I shared the place with my good friend Mr. Harris. He was a retired teacher, but he had a sharp mind and loved solving problems. People in town often came to him when they had no answers from the police, or when they were too afraid to share their troubles with others. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever received a message or letter that made you feel nervous and curious at the same time? If you have, I want to hear about it. Share your story in the comments. That winter evening was colder than usual, and I remember the sound of the wind as it shook the windows of our sitting room. Mr. Harris was restless. He stood by the fire, pacing from one side of the room to the other. He hated having nothing to do, and when there was no problem to solve, he became almost sad. I was reading the newspaper when there was a knock at the door. At first, I thought it was a neighbor, but when I opened it, I saw a young woman standing outside. She was not dressed in fine clothes, but she had a neat and tidy look. Her hands were holding a small box, and her face showed both worry and hope. Her name was Anna Miller. She explained that she worked as a seamstress, sewing dresses for ladies in town. She did not have much family, and her life was usually simple. But for the last 6 years, something strange had been happening to her. On the same date every year, she received a letter or small package. At first, it seemed like a cruel trick, but each time she opened the package, she found a single old coin inside. These were not ordinary coins. They were ancient, heavy, and marked with designs she had never seen before. Along with the coins came a small card with only 3 words: "You are not forgotten." Anna told us that her father, Captain Miller, had been an officer who once worked overseas in East Africa. He left when she was still a child, and one day, without warning, he never returned. For many years, she thought he might come back, but after 10 years of silence, she accepted that he was gone. The letters began arriving 4 years after his disappearance. At first, she was afraid. Who could be sending them? What did they mean? She kept the coins hidden in a wooden box under her bed, but with every passing year, her fear grew into curiosity. That morning, she had received something different. Instead of a coin, she found a letter with clear instructions. The letter told her to meet a stranger at 7 o'clock that evening outside the old opera house on the other side of town. It also said that if she felt afraid, she could bring 2 friends, but she must not bring the police. The message ended with a strange promise. "Tonight you will learn the truth." Mr. Harris was instantly alive with energy. His eyes lit up the moment Anna finished her story. He told her at once that we would go with her. I admit, I was not so sure. The thought of walking into a trap worried me. What if this was the plan of some criminal? What if the stranger wished to harm Anna or steal the coins? Still, I could see the desperate hope in Anna's eyes. She wanted answers about her father. She had lived too long with fear and silence. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 4, and the light outside was already fading. The town looked dark and cold. I wrapped myself in my coat, pulled my scarf tight, and followed Mr. Harris and Anna out into the street. We walked quickly, our breath rising like smoke in the air. The opera house was on the edge of town, near the river. It had been closed for years, and no music had been heard inside its walls since I was a child. As we walked, Anna spoke about her father. She told us that he had been a brave man, but also a secretive one. He never spoke much about his work in Africa, but he often carried maps and strange objects home from his travels. She remembered a small box of letters that he once kept locked. After his disappearance, the police searched his belongings, but they found nothing that could explain where he had gone. Anna had always believed that his disappearance was not an accident. Mr. Harris asked her about the coins. She described them carefully. Each one was different, but they all came from faraway places. Some had writing she could not read, and others showed animals she had never seen. Harris nodded with interest and said that such coins could only have come from a treasure collection, perhaps something taken during a military campaign. This idea frightened Anna. She wondered if her father had done something wrong, something that had put his life in danger. By the time we reached the opera house, the streets were almost empty. The building stood tall, silent, and broken. The windows were dark, and only the moonlight gave it shape. The letter had told Anna to stand at the left side of the entrance, so we did. We waited in the cold, our eyes searching the shadows. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind cut across my face, and I wished I had stayed home. But then a figure stepped out from the darkness. The man was thin, with a pale face and nervous movements. He asked if Anna was alone, and when she shook her head and pointed to us, he seemed uneasy. Still, he told us to follow him. Against my better judgment, we did. He led us through side streets until we reached a large decaying house. The windows were covered with thick curtains, and only one small lamp burned inside. He opened the door and motioned for us to enter. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. Paintings of faraway landscapes hung on the walls, but they were faded and cracked. The man introduced himself as Thomas Redgrave. He explained that his father had once been a colonial officer serving in the same region as Captain Miller. He asked us to sit, and then he began his story. He told us that his father and Captain Miller had discovered something extraordinary while in Africa. It was not a simple object, but a great treasure of gold coins and old manuscripts. The treasure had been hidden away for centuries, and finding it should have been a cause for celebration. But instead, it destroyed both families. Greed, fear, and betrayal followed them back to England. Thomas claimed that his father had taken the treasure and kept it hidden in a secret location, refusing to share it with Captain Miller. The argument between the two men grew dangerous, and soon after, Captain Miller disappeared. Anna gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. I could see the pain in her eyes. She had hoped for answers, but not for this. Mr. Harris leaned forward, his face hard. He asked Thomas why he had sent the letters and coins. Thomas explained that he wanted to make peace. He believed Anna deserved her father's share of the treasure, and he wanted her to know the truth, but he also warned us. His father had been haunted by a figure known only as the Black Hand, a man with a mechanical arm who had sworn revenge. As Thomas finished, a noise broke the silence. A shadow moved at the window, and a sharp dart struck the wall beside Anna's chair. carried the smell of poison. Thomas turned pale. "He has found us," he whispered. My heart raced. Mr. Harris jumped to his feet, ready to act. And that was how our search for the hidden treasure truly began. The moment that dart hit the wall, the air inside the house seemed to freeze. Anna gasped and held my arm. Mr. Harris rushed to the window, but saw only darkness outside. Thomas Redgrave was trembling so much that he could hardly speak. His face was pale, and he whispered that the Black Hand had been watching him for weeks. I felt fear rising inside me. I had never been so close to danger before. The thought that a poisoned dart had been meant for Anna, or for one of us, made my hands shake. Mr. Harris pulled the dart from the wall carefully and held it under the lamp. He studied it for a long moment and then placed it on the table. He told us it was a weapon not from England, but from some distant land. The poison, he explained, could kill within minutes if it touched the skin. I shivered as I thought about how close it had come to Anna. Thomas sat down heavily and covered his face with his hands. He said he had tried to do the right thing by calling us, but now he feared it was too late. The Black Hand would never stop. He wanted revenge, and he wanted the treasure. Mr. Harris asked Thomas to show us proof of what he had told us. Slowly, Thomas reached into his coat and brought out a folded piece of paper. His fingers shook as he spread it on the table. It was half of a map. The lines were faded, but I could see drawings of rivers, hills, and what looked like an old building marked with a red cross. Thomas explained that his father had torn the map into 2 pieces before he died. He kept one piece and gave the other to a trusted friend. Thomas said he had found his father's half only a few months ago, hidden inside a drawer. The other half, he believed, had once belonged to Captain Miller. If that was true, it might be hidden among his belongings, or passed down to Anna without her knowledge. Anna shook her head. She said she had nothing of her father except a few clothes, a photograph, and the box where she kept the strange coins. Mr. Harris suggested that perhaps the coins themselves were connected to the map. He told her to bring them to him the next day so he could examine them more closely. Thomas begged us to leave at once. He said his house was no longer safe and that the Black Hand would not rest until he had the map. We agreed and hurried out into the night, our hearts beating fast. The streets were dark, and I kept looking over my shoulder, certain that someone was following us. We returned to our boarding house, and only when the fire was burning in the grate did I feel a little safe again. Anna sat silently, holding her small box of coins. She looked lost, as if the weight of her father's mystery had grown too heavy. Mr. Harris paced the room, thinking aloud. He said that if the Black Hand was after the treasure, then the treasure was real. That meant we had to move quickly before the enemy found it first. The next morning, Anna brought the box of coins. Mr. Harris placed them on the table one by one and examined them carefully with his magnifying glass. I leaned close, curious to see what he saw. On the back of one coin, almost hidden by scratches, there was a faint mark. It was the shape of a cross, very similar to the one on Thomas's map. On another coin, there were tiny letters, so small that Anna had never noticed them. They spelled out part of a word. Harris explained that the coins were not random gifts. They were pieces of a puzzle. Whoever had sent them wanted Anna to put them together, to see the connection, and to find the treasure. Anna's face was pale but determined. She told us she could not turn back now. She needed to know what had happened to her father, even if the truth was painful. I admired her courage, for I felt fear in my own chest. Harris told us that we had to meet Thomas again and compare the marks on the coins with his map. Together, perhaps we could find the location of the treasure. But first, he said, we must be careful. If the Black Hand was truly following us, then every step we took was dangerous. That evening we returned to Thomas's house. He looked weaker than before, as if fear had stolen his strength. When Harris showed him the coins, Thomas gasped and said that the marks did indeed complete part of the map. He believed the treasure was hidden in an old warehouse by the river, a place that his father had visited many times before his death. He remembered hearing strange noises at night and seeing carts move in and out of that warehouse, even though it was supposed to be abandoned. Harris listened carefully and then made a decision. We would go there the following night. The day that followed was one of the longest in my life. I tried to work on my articles for the newspaper, but my hands shook so much that I could not write. My mind was filled with images of the poisoned dart, of the shadow at the window, and of the treasure that seemed to carry a curse. Anna stayed with me, and we spoke quietly together. She told me about her childhood, about waiting at the window for her father to return, about the disappointment that filled her when years passed without a word. Now she said she was afraid of the truth. What if her father had not disappeared by accident? What if greed and betrayal had been the cause? Night came at last. Harris carried a lantern and his walking stick. I had nothing but my notebook, though I wished I had something stronger to protect myself. Anna wore her dark cloak and kept the coins hidden in her pocket. Together, we made our way to the river. The air was cold, and the sound of the water was like a warning. The warehouse stood tall and silent, its broken windows like empty eyes staring down at us. Harris found a door at the side, and with a firm push, it opened. Inside, the air was damp and heavy. The wooden floor creaked under our feet. Harris raised his lantern, and the light showed long rows of empty crates and barrels. For a moment, it seemed that the place was deserted, but then we saw something in the corner. Covered with dust and ropes was a large chest. Anna caught her breath, and I felt my heart beat faster. Harris hurried forward and wiped the dust away. On the lid of the chest was the same mark we had seen on the coin, the cross that pointed to the hidden treasure. But before we could touch it, a sound echoed through the building. Heavy footsteps moved on the floor above us, then on the stairs. Harris whispered for us to stay behind him. The lantern light flickered as the air grew colder. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs. It was tall, broad, and moved with uneven steps. When the figure came closer, the light showed what we had feared. His left arm was made of metal. It shone in the lantern light like silver. The Black Hand had found us. Anna gripped my arm tightly. Harris stood firm, his eyes never leaving the figure. The man spoke, his voice low and filled with anger. He said the treasure did not belong to us. He said it had been cursed since the day it was taken from its land, and anyone who touched it would suffer. Harris asked him what he wanted. The man lifted his metal arm and pointed at Anna. He said her father had betrayed him and his people, and now she would pay the price. I felt cold all over. Anna stood frozen, but Harris stepped forward. He told the man that Anna was innocent, that the sins of the father should not fall on the daughter. The Black Hand laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in the empty warehouse. He took another step closer, and from the shadows behind him came another figure. This one was smaller, quick, and carried a tube in his hand. I knew at once it was the weapon that fired poisoned darts. We were trapped. The chest was before us, the enemy behind us. Harris looked at me, and I understood he was thinking quickly, planning a way out. He whispered for me to stay calm, but my heart was beating so loudly that I could hardly hear him. Anna's face was pale as snow, but her eyes were fixed on the chest. Perhaps she felt that all her father's secrets were locked inside it, waiting for her to open it. At that moment, the lantern flickered again. The wind outside howled, and the door we had entered through slammed shut. The sound startled everyone. Harris seized the chance. He grabbed a rope from the floor and swung it at the smaller man, knocking the tube from his hand. The dart fell harmlessly to the ground. The black hand roared in anger and rushed forward. Harris shouted for us to run. We ran towards the far end of the warehouse, the sound of footsteps close behind. Anna stumbled, but I caught her arm and pulled her up. Harris fought with the black hand, the clash of metal against wood filling the air. I turned and saw them struggle near the chest. The lid shook, and for a moment it looked as if it might burst open. Then there was a loud crack, and the floor beneath the chest began to give way. The black hand cried out as the wood split, and the heavy chest slipped. With a terrible sound, it fell through the floor and crashed into the darkness below. Harris pulled Anna and me to safety just in time. We looked down into the hole and saw nothing but water shining in the lantern light. The treasure was gone, swallowed by the river that ran under the warehouse. The black hand stood at the edge, breathing heavily. His eyes burned with anger, but he said nothing. Slowly, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, his footsteps fading into silence. We were left, standing in the cold, empty building, the treasure lost forever, and the truth only half revealed. The warehouse was silent after the black hand disappeared into the night. The only sound was the faint rush of the river below us, carrying away the chest that had once held the treasure. I stood still, my heart racing, unable to believe what had happened. The treasure that had cost so many lives and caused so much fear was gone in seconds. Anna leaned against the wall, her face white and her body shaking. Mr. Harris placed a hand on her shoulder and told her softly that she was safe. But I could see in her eyes that safety was not enough. She wanted the truth, and she wanted peace from the shadow of her father's past. We left the warehouse before the black hand could return. The streets were empty, and the cold air bit our faces. Harris walked quickly, keeping Anna between us, his eyes always moving from shadow to shadow. When we reached our boarding house, we lit the fire and sat in silence. None of us could find the right words. Finally, Anna spoke. She said she felt empty, as if a part of her life had ended in that warehouse. For years she had dreamed of her father's return, or at least of learning why he had disappeared. Now she knew he had been caught in a story of greed, betrayal, and treasure that destroyed everything it touched. She began to cry quietly, and I sat beside her, holding her hand until she grew calm again. The next morning, Mr. Harris left early. He told us he wanted to search for more information about Captain Miller and about the Black Hand. He said there were still unanswered questions, and he could not rest until he had at least tried to solve them. Anna and I stayed in the sitting room, too tired and shaken to go anywhere. She looked at the box of coins on the table and whispered that she hated them now. They were the start of everything, the strange gifts that led her into danger. I told her they were also the reason she now knew the truth. they had guided her to this moment. She looked at me sadly and said perhaps the truth was heavier than she could bear. When Harris returned that evening, his face was serious. He had been to the town records office, and he had found letters and papers that had once belonged to Captain Miller. The records showed that Miller and Redgrave's father had indeed worked together in Africa. They had discovered ancient manuscripts describing the location of buried gold. But there were also reports of missing objects from villages and complaints from local people about treasures taken by force. Harris told us quietly that Captain Miller may have been part of actions that were not honorable. The treasure had not belonged to him or to Redgrave's father. It had been stolen, and because of that, it carried a curse of guilt and revenge. Anna listened with tears in her eyes. She said she had loved her father and had hoped he was a good man. Harris answered gently that perhaps he had been a brave soldier, but he had also been human, and humans often make mistakes that hurt others. The Black Hand, Harris explained, had once been a young man in one of those villages. He had lost his family and his home because of men like Miller and Redgrave's father. His revenge had followed them back to England, and now it had reached Anna. I felt a deep sadness for Anna. She had done nothing wrong, yet she carried the pain of her father's choices, not his. She sat silently for a long time, staring at the coins. At last she said she wanted to be free. She asked Harris to take the coins away and throw them into the river, the same river that had swallowed the chest. She said she never wanted to see them again. Harris nodded and promised he would do as she asked. That night, I watched from the window as he walked to the riverbank and dropped the coins one by one into the dark water. When he returned, he said it was finished. The treasure was gone, and with it, the curse. Days passed, and life slowly began to return to normal. The town moved on as it always did, busy with factory smoke and trains rushing in and out of the station. But for us, something had changed. Anna stayed with us at the boarding house for a while. She did not want to return to her empty rooms too soon. She and I spent many evenings talking by the fire. She spoke of her childhood, of how she had once waited at the window for her father, and of how she would now try to live without waiting. She said she wanted to build a life of her own, a life without secrets and shadows. Mr. Harris was pleased to see her strength return. He told her that sometimes the greatest treasure is not gold or jewels, but freedom from fear. He reminded us that the Black Hand might still be out there, but without the treasure, he no longer had a reason to follow Anna. His battle was with the past, not with her. Anna smiled weakly and said she hoped he would finally let her go. One evening, Thomas Redgrave came to visit. He looked thin and ill, his eyes full of worry. He told us he had not slept since the night of the warehouse. He was haunted by the memory of the Black Hand and by the thought of the lost treasure. Harris told him firmly that the treasure had only brought pain to everyone who touched it. He advised Thomas to let it go and to live quietly, away from the shadow of his father's choices. Thomas nodded but looked unconvinced. He left soon after, and we never saw him again. As for Anna, she stayed with us through the winter. Slowly, her laughter returned. She found small joys in her work as a seamstress, and she began to make friends in town. One night, as we sat by the fire, she thanked me for standing with her through the danger. She said she would never forget the moment when we faced the Black Hand together and how my hand had kept her from falling. I told her that she had been the brave one. and that she had faced truths most people would never have the strength to face. Harris continued his quiet life of puzzles and problems, but even he admitted that the case of the hidden treasure was one he would never forget. He said it had shown him how greed could destroy families and how secrets could poison generations, but he also said it had shown him how courage could heal wounds and how truth, though painful, could bring freedom. Spring finally came, and Anna decided it was time to move forward. She found a small house near her work and said goodbye to the boarding house. On her last evening with us, we walked together to the river. The water flowed calmly, carrying with it all the memories of the winter past. Anna stood for a long moment, then said she would no longer think of treasure or curses. She would think of her father with love, but she would also accept the truth. She turned to me with a small smile and said she wanted to live in the present, not in the shadow of the past. As I watched her walk away, I felt both sadness and pride. She had lost much, but she had found herself. I knew she would carry scars, but I also knew she would carry strength. Harris came to stand beside me and said softly that this was the real end of the story. The treasure was gone, but something greater remained. Anna had been given her freedom, and we had all learned that no amount of gold could ever replace peace of heart. When I returned to my room that night, I wrote the story in my notebook. I wanted to remember every detail, not because of the treasure, but because of what it had taught me. We often think treasures are shining objects locked inside boxes, but the true treasures are the truths we face and the lives we build after the storms. And as I closed my book, I whispered a prayer that the river would hold the cursed treasure forever at the bottom, never to rise again. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share it with someone who loves emotional stories. Tell me in the comments, would you have followed the map or walked away from the treasure?